Okay, babe, I need you to be quiet now. Okay. Manage participants. Okay. Okay, can everyone hear me?
I can hear you, Libby.
Awesome, thanks, Ina.
You're welcome.
Okay. We're gonna have a lot of people today. Hi, Elizabeth. Oh, you're muted. If you go down to the lower left-hand corner, you can click the mute and unmute. Okay, I'm getting last-minute texts from Leslie and Kim, so making sure everyone can get in.
Hi, Dana.
Hi, good morning. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Sorry we won't be yoga-ing tomorrow
Oh
or
my God.
Sunday.
Me too. Me too.
Good morning.
Good morning, Leslie Barber.
Hi. Oh, shoot, what did
Now
I
I
do?
can actually hear. Good morning. Hi, Dana Francis.
Barber, so good to see you finally in this wonderful training.
Yeah, so good to see you. It's been a while.
I just do. Crap. Go away. I just pulled something up on my screen and now I can't see anyone. There we go. Now it's going away. Okay, minimize that. Cool. Awesome. Chat up. Okay, got another email I need to add. Okay. Oops, it didn't even go. How is everyone doing?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. What? Well, while we're waiting for everyone to get on, how is everyone doing today?
Good. Good. Pretty well.
Awesome. I know Kim is going to talk a little bit about self-care in these strange times before we officially get started. But in the meantime, chat amongst yourselves while we finish getting set up.
Well, I want to thank you for making this available on Zoom.
Oh, of course. I feel like I've
Very
been on so
helpful.
many Zoom meetings this week. There's Kim.
Hi.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Hi, Picky. It's flashing on different faces. I love it. So we'll get started here in just a little bit and let everyone else get on.
Yep. Also, as everyone's coming on, can you please type your full name in the chat just so we have a backup attendance log?
Good idea, Libby.
So if you don't know where that is, go on the bottom of your screen and there will be a little chat function.
Do you see it now?
And then just type your name and send it to everyone. See, yep, perfect.
Yeah.
I think there's a way to save that. I am recording the session, so if I can figure it out, I will send it out to everyone afterwards as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Elizabeth. I can't hear you.
Oh, she's got her muted.
Hi. I keep muting and unmuting myself. Good morning.
Okay.
Can you all see my name? I typed it in, but I don't see how to send it.
I think you just hit enter.
Oh,
There you go.
oh, good. Thank
Oh,
you.
good, Tony, you got in.
Got it.
Yay, Tony, it worked. I hear your
Yeah,
voice.
yeah. I don't know what on earth that was about. It didn't come through at work, so, but who knows?
Yeah, because it showed on my end that it went through, but who knows? I think businesses might be shutting down emails or something.
Yeah.
High volume.
All right. Is Leslie on right now too?
Yep.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You guys haven't met yet, have you?
No, I haven't. I've only heard her voice, so I get to put a face with it. What do you suggest, Libby, as the best format for watching? I just have different faces flashing on my screen. I am not Zoom savvy.
Yeah, so I was going to go over, I'll go over this a couple of times because there's some different settings that you can use. So assuming that you are all on a computer, I know phones and iPads are a little different and a little harder to use, but if you're on a computer, the easiest way is, if you're mousing over stuff, you go up to the top right corner, and if you're seeing everyone's face right now, you'll see a little thing that says speaker view. If you click that, it will go to it will go to speaker view. We're in gallery view right now.
Okay.
So and it will be what is individually seen on your screen. So if you want to see just the person who is speaking, if you click that, it'll just show the person who's speaking. And once we get started, I'm going to mute everybody. So just Leslie and I will be talking. We're going to have question time. So there will be times where we're going to unmute you and allow you to ask questions, or you can depending on how much I'm looking at it, you can type questions in the chat. But we're going to have a few times throughout that we're going to have questions, so you don't necessarily have to save them all the way till the end. But we will have time at the end as well, assuming we don't run out of time. We have a lot we want to cover today.
All right. Well, it is 9:01 a.m. and I'm your president, Kim Richards. I'm going to give a really short spiel. And I just want to say welcome. Thank you for adapting to our online format. And thank you, Libby and Leslie, for continuing to provide this for us. The virtual elephant in the room is that we are all dealing with this pandemic and the way it impacts our lives personally and professionally. So I just want to acknowledge and hold space for that as we dive into learning about outpatient eating disorder treatment. The board is very much mindful of the fact that this is going on, and we want to be there for all of you therapists. We're getting together as a board after this, and we're going to talk about different opportunities for therapists to support one another, some virtual online forums at different times of the day. So, if morning's better, afternoon, evening, I'm hoping there will be a time where you can join us and we can just support one another as we all do our best to support our clients through this. So thank you for just your service and all that you do. And I know there's a personal and professional impact of this. And you'll be hearing a lot more from the board on different resources and supports for you as therapists. And if you have a specific need, feel free to email me. It'll be confidential, and I'll just float the idea, and we'll do what we can to pull together as a community. So that's all I have to say. Without further ado, I'm passing the torch to Leslie and to Libby.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone except for me and Leslie right now. And then once I do that, I will tell you a little more what's happening here. So do that, and then I need to unmute Leslie. Or can you unmute yourself, Leslie?
I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Good morning. Thank you, Kim, for just speaking to that. As you and I had talked earlier in the week, it was kind of like I was really feeling it. And I think it's important for us to just, simply acknowledge it and just hold that space. That said, I think it's super important for us to, even in this Zoom meeting, we're trying to make this, as normal as possible. And even just taking care of ourselves in the next 2 hours, stretching, potty break, whatever that means, I think is important. And I'm going to do the same, even though I'm speaking. So I just want to kind of put that out there. I think it's important. So, and thank you, Kim, for addressing that. So like Libby said, we are sorry, my brain just totally blanked. We're taking questions throughout. So, and we'll also do it at the end. So we just want it to be more of a fluid conversation and less of a presentation, and it's just, yammering at you for 2 hours. So, so just know that there's also, just kind of, you can do it a couple ways, get our attention on the screen, or the other way is there's a way down below where you can actually like raise your hand. Is that under participants, Libby?
That's a good question. I'm not seeing it at the
Let's
moment.
see. Oh yeah, so if you, at the bottom of your screen, if you click on participants, at the bottom of that little box on the right-hand side, there's a little button that says raise hand. So that's just another way to do it.
Leslie, can you do that real quick so I can see what that looks like on my end?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so just a couple different ways to keep the flow. So, okay, so I just want to say first that this is a brief overview. So this isn't going to make you an expert on this topic, but we just wanted to give insight to the overview of eating disorder treatment at the outpatient level. We'll talk a little bit about higher levels of care as well. And because I get this from a lot of different therapists, throughout the years, kind of like not knowing what to do, like suspecting, I don't know, maybe my client has an eating disorder, I'm not sure. And so we just want to give you some tools and insight into that. And so we'll get started. So first of all, I just want to kind of speak to what's happening for our clients that are experiencing an eating disorder. So there's a couple of different components. We have the biological component, which, oftentimes clients are just wired that way as far as being kind of predisposed, I guess, as far as like genetics. Typically we see anxiety and depression goes hand in hand with an eating disorder. There's also that, of course, trickle down effect from parents. Culture, I mean, we're inundated with so many images and so much information about diets. And I mean, this has gone on forever and it continues, right? So right now I see a lot of keto, I see a lot of paleo, and it will continue to change. So our culture isn't really a culture that promotes recovery or intuitive eating, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's really one that kind of encourages dieting and this idea of what healthy looks like, right? Which can often be disguised as somebody, you know, with an eating disorder. They're like, oh, awesome, I can get on this healthy bandwagon, right? And be disguised under that. Environment. So environment obviously plays a part as well, as far as, you know, whatever trauma that they have experienced, because, you know, one person's trauma is not another person's trauma. Also, typically people that struggle with disordered eating are super sensitive, so sensitive beings, and they often tend to pick up what's happening in the room, what's happening for other people, and tend to kind of absorb it. And so their trauma can be transitioning to another school or something like that, where maybe another kid or another person is super resilient in that. So really, what the eating disorder is really about is coping. People are coping, trying to cope to regulate their emotions. A lot of times I hear people say, oh, well, it's all about control. And I mean, I think that's a component, but I don't think that's really what it's about. It's they're just trying to cope to feel better. And they've just been kind of set up this way. So the eating disorder voice versus the healthy self. So when we think about eating disorders, we kind of think about it in two different parts of the person. One is that healthy self, which is the person they were kind of like born to be. And somewhere along the way, with all of those components that I just spoke about, they kind of get cut off from that. So they get cut off emotionally, and the eating disorder voice starts in. Now, when the eating disorder voice starts in, over the years and over time, it starts getting louder and louder and louder. So we've all experienced a critical voice, right? That critical part of ourselves that will sometimes come in and want to, you know, tell us things that aren't true. So it's like that, only on steroids. So their brain is just like hearing all of these rules and all of these shoulds and things really super loudly. So it really dictates and takes up much of their space in their lives. So is that making sense to you guys? Okay. All right. So our goal, you know, in therapy is to really strengthen that healthy kind of true self, and maybe find that, because it's there, but it's often super buried underneath all the chaos, and help to empower and grow that part of themselves. And as we do so, the eating disorder voice starts to shrink and eventually goes away. That's another thing. I'm taking more time on this than I thought. Sorry, Libby. I think that's another important thing to say is Libby and I both really believe in being fully recovered. Some people believe that recovery is like an ongoing process, and it does take quite some time. But really, we do believe that, so that they can be fully in their healthy self. Another question or assumption that I think comes up a lot is people assuming that eating disorders are an addiction. And again, Libby and I do not subscribe to that philosophy. We consider it more of a process addiction. And so it's more like the one thing that I can kind of liken it to is more like sex addiction. So it's more of the process of it instead of like the food itself, right? So the food itself is not, we don't consider it to be addictive. We consider the process of it being like more of the addiction.
And just to speak to that a little bit more, because I know a lot of people do believe that food is addictive. We hear all those things about like sugar being as addictive as heroin or, you know, cheese or whatever. And the science really just isn't supporting that. So I'm going to be sending out some resources afterwards, some on addiction stuff, but also on a lot of other topics. So just to let you know, there's going to be another email coming from me after this sometime today that will have the recording and our list of resources. I didn't send it out ahead of time in case we thought of anything else that we wanted to add to it during this talk.
Thanks.
Also, before we move on, if you are not currently muted, would you please mute yourself just in case we get background noise? And then we'll be letting you know when we'll be opening it up for questions as well.
Any questions so far or thoughts, comments? No.
Cool. All right. Are you done with the process addiction part?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we're going to move into a really brief overview of the different types of eating disorders as defined in the DSM-5. So this is something I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the part about what's the dietitian's role, but I think it's important for you all to know that, you know, not only do eating disorders kind of fluctuate and they can morph from one to another throughout their time. Not everyone is going to meet all of the strict diagnostic features of a specific eating disorder. That does not mean that they don't have a problem. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. But also, the dietitian is not legally allowed to make a diagnosis. That being said, you are going to want to consult with the rest of the team, which we're going to talk about in terms of finding a diagnosis for your client, because they can be kind of slippery and make you think that they're one thing and they're something else. So we'll talk about that. But we're going to talk about the 5 main types of eating disorders as defined in the DSM-5. There are a few other feeding and eating disorders is the chapter in the DSM about this. So there are some different ones, but the main ones that we see that we're going to talk about are anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, other specified feeding and eating disorders, or OSFED, and avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, or ARFID. So I'm assuming you all have DSMs or you have access to them, so we're not going to go through and, you know, give you the whole spiel on each one. We're just going to give you kind of the highlights of each of these different health issues. So starting with anorexia nervosa. So this is probably what most people, I have spoken at events with, you know, just general public, and I will ask the question, when you think of someone with an eating disorder, what do you think of? And inevitably we get like the, you know, emaciated young white girl, or people will just flat out say anorexia, and it's like the only one they know. Or they'll be like the one where they don't eat or the one where they purge. Like that's like what the general public seems to know about eating disorders, at least until more recently. I think people are understanding there's a lot more to it now. But anorexia is not necessarily defined by, none of these are defined by a body type, and we'll get into that. But anorexia is characterized by eating less than they need to maintain their body as appropriate for age, sex, developmental trajectory, all of that. So there is not a specific amount of weight that needs to be lost. There is not even a specific BMI they need to be under anymore. There are different levels of severity. And along with that, there is the persistent thought of feeling not good with their body, that they're going to get fat, that they are fat. This is not necessarily a thing in all of the different types of eating disorders. So that's kind of a specific characteristic with specifically anorexia and bulimia is the body image issue in there. I didn't make more notes on this. Leslie, what am I leaving?
No, I think that's, yeah, I think that's good. I think that's
Okay.
a good overview. Yeah.
We can go into these more, but again, I assume that after this, you'll all take a few minutes and read this chapter in your DSM. Bulimia nervosa is characterized by episodes of eating too much, binge eating, and then finding a way to compensate for that. Stereotypically, we think of self-induced vomiting, which I don't know if there's statistics on this. We think of it as kind of the most common way of compensating, but there's also, it could be overexercise. It could be restricting after a binge. It could be diet pills, laxatives, diuretics. There's so many different ways of compensating for eating. And in order to be diagnosed with this, it needs to happen at least once a week. The binge and the purge needs to happen at least once a week for at least 3 months to be diagnosed. Now, of course, we don't want people waiting that long to seek treatment. So if someone's identifying that they've been, this has happened, a couple of times, that's a red flag for me. That's enough to say, okay, let's work on this. It doesn't need to be happening every week to say that there's some sort of disordered eating happening. And I know Leslie and I both had clients that are purging multiple times a day through whatever means. So I've had clients that have thrown up nearly everything that they eat, like every time they eat. I've had lots of clients that spend 3 hours a day in the gym, and that is a form of bulimia. Assuming that they are doing it as a way of compensating for their eating. Not to say that everyone who exercises that much has bulimia or is over exercising, because, of course, Olympic athletes and whatnot need to be doing that much, but there's a marked difference in the reason behind it. Okay, and then I'm going to go on to binge eating disorder, which along the lines of bulimia, it needs to happen at least once a week for at least 3 months to be diagnosed. And the binge in both binge eating and bulimia is significantly more food than a typical person would eat under similar circumstances in one sitting. So over the course of, they say kind of on average 2 hours, but it's very up to the diagnoser on how you want to look at this. I have a lot of clients who are restrictive eaters who will eat a bowl of cereal and say, oh my gosh, I binged. That is not a binge. And it really, when we're thinking about a true binge, it needs to be significantly more than, like I would say, minimum 2 large restaurant dinners would be a binge, if not a lot more. I've had clients that have had, 8 to 10,000 calorie binges. So we're looking at large amounts of food, and then there's a marked distress or shame surrounding that. And if it's binge eating disorder versus bulimia, there's no compensating for it. So they're feeling that shame and guilt, and they're not trying to make up for it per se. Any questions on those 3 eating disorders so far?
I just want to add something about the binge eating disorder. One of the questions I ask or kind of explore with a client when I suspect when they're like, they'll identify as binging is when someone is in a true binge and not just overeating, it's almost like a light switch. Like you turn the light switch and it's on. They kind of go into a trance, and almost loose. It's not disassociation, but it's like maybe a step below that. So where they really don't have any sense of time, and they just kind of, it's usually typically very fast eating, and they're unable to stop. So it's kind of that light switch piece is what signals to me that they're in a true binge.
Mm-hmm.
So.
One other thing I would say, kind of across the board with all of the eating disorders, but particularly binge eating and bulimia, is a lot of secret eating or hiding or sneaking food. Usually binges, I'm sure this is not shocking, but usually binges are very secretive. People will take food back to their room. They will hide wrappers. I've had college students who, without desiring to, have stolen their roommate's food because they didn't have anything to binge on. And, you know, they feel remorseful about it, but they're so compelled that they weren't able to stop. So it can look like a lot of different things.
Yeah, I've had clients that have stolen from the grocery store so they can binge in their car. And so just a lot of shame, a lot of secrecy around these disorders. So the next one is OSFED, or otherwise specified feeding and eating disorders, formerly known as EDNOS, which my brain still wants to go to that one. So that's basically kind of, I would say, a catch-all, because more often than not, clients aren't going to fit into one of these specific categories, right? Meeting all of the diagnostic criteria. And so I would say like the biggest diagnosis we probably have there is OSFED. And I'm not going to go into all the details. You guys have DSMs, and I don't want to bore you with that. So just know that that's more of kind of like the catch-all when someone's like, they don't fit, but more often than not, they'll fit in that OSFED category. Moving on to ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This is I would say, newer one that we've been seeing. And I would say probably within the last 2 years. And honestly, when I first had my first client with ARFID, I didn't even recognize it. It's been that uncommon, or just not recognized, period. So it wasn't until I started, chatting with my colleagues that it's like, oh, I totally missed that. So that was a real eye-opener for me. And I've also, I kind of have a lot to say about that. Let me see. My brain's in different directions. So let's see where I go here. So I would say oftentimes this one can get slipped through the crack, because we'll see this sometimes in clients that have super high anxiety or even depression. And, as we know, when people are really anxious or really depressed, their appetite can change, right? We even see, that's one of our questions about depression is, weight loss, and has there any trying to lose weight. So that's, I think, one of the things with these clients is they're not specifically trying to lose weight. So it can kind of get disguised in with some other diagnoses. With ARFID, they typically avoid certain foods. And I often hear this coming across in a way of like a sensory issue. So certain foods, they can't tolerate a texture, or texture is probably the number one thing I hear. So it's avoiding foods, and you will see weight loss. Often in my experience, it's been the few cases that I've seen, it's been weight loss, in a very significant weight loss in a short amount of time. So just something to kind of think about as you have your clients that start presenting that way. I think it's worth exploring a little bit further as far as, what's really going on. I just had this experience a couple maybe a month ago at a training and I was speaking with another clinician, and she was like, I have this client, and it was just that she's super depressed, and she started telling me about this particular client, and I'm like, it sounds like ARFID. So, just kind of giving her resources to, check in with a dietitian, kind of basically, I think not doing it on your own. I think that's kind of the key there. If you have any kind of like suspicions, like just call one of us, let's consult, let's just see if there's anything else there. Any questions about that so far?
Yes, Dana, you unmute yourself.
Yeah, my question, and maybe you're going to speak to it later, is Leslie, you clearly described the excessive binge eating, the shame and guilt that follows, but generally what happened right before the binge eating? What was, I guess, trigger, or what happened, and then the binge eating met some need? I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I'm going to actually screen share something that I share with a lot of clients. So good question. Okay. All right, can you all see this little, whoops, where'd it go? This little, whoops, that's not what I want. That's my baby. Where did it go? Hang on a second. I had it pulled up. I was prepared. I decided not to. Here we go. All right, let's try this again. Share. Hopefully it will stay on this. Do you all see the little binge restrict wheel here?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So what is typically happening, and this can be in any of the eating disorders except for ARFID, is this what I call the binge restrict cycle. And so what's happening, whether it's a binge or for someone in anorexia, they did bad and they ate the thing they said they weren't going to eat, or, whatever. So if we see at the top of the wheel, we have the binge or overeating or doing bad or breaking the diet or however. So this is kind of the thought process that happens in the action. So that leads to shame and guilt and self-loathing, however else you want to describe that, which then leads them to trying to do something about it. So there's restriction. Oh my gosh, I ate so much. I'm going to do better tomorrow. They wake up in the morning and they skip breakfast. They eat really light. They, say they're only going to eat fruit today, whatever the thing is, which inevitably leads to hunger or deprivation or both. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be that they are lacking enough energy and calories. It can be truly deprivation of a sensation or a food that they're missing. So let's say someone is, doing clean eating, which I hate that term, but whatever the thing is that their rules around food are. So they, whether it's the eating disorder, they want to lose weight or whatever, they're following some food rules. So they're not eating their favorite foods. Well, over time, this leads to a feeling of deprivation. It's putting those things on a pedestal. So even if they're eating technically enough food, they're eventually going to have some sort of breakdown with this, and it will be exacerbated by stress, too much decision-making throughout the day, other triggers, which could be a whole host of things, which will then lead them to the top of the circle again, binge, overeat, do bad, whatever. So you can see the circle can keep going around and round, and it doesn't necessarily have to always look the same. And while I'm on this circle, this is something that I show, like I'd say 95% of my clients fit this cycle in some iteration. So I do often show this to them and I'll say, do you recognize this in yourself? And they'll look at it and they're like, oh yeah. And the thing that I hear from everyone is whether they have anorexia and it's, you know, that bowl of cereal that freaks them out and they're doing bad, or they're, you know, they're not following their keto diet or whatever, or they're having a true binge. The thing that everyone wants to stop, and the reason that they're coming into my office, is they want to stop that part at the top. They don't want to overeat, to do bad, whatever. And that's the thing that they're trying to stop. They're like, well, if I just work my willpower hard enough, I can fix this. If I just do good enough, if I can stick to my diet, I'm going to fix this. And that inevitably leads to the hunger and deprivation, and they're going to be stuck in this cycle forever if they keep doing that. So where I really focus on breaking the cycle is getting them to stop the stuff on the bottom. If they can let go of their food rules, if they can eat enough, eat the things that they truly enjoy, if they can allow rest days in their exercise regimen, if they can start letting go of the perfectionism traits, which is so common in most of the eating disorders, that's going to break the cycle. So all of my focus goes on, I don't care if you binge today. You know, it's probably going to happen. But what I want you to do is I want to make sure you're not skipping any meals right now. If you binge, I want you to eat your next scheduled meal or snack. If they keep saying, oh my gosh, I binged, I ate enough for 2 days, why should I eat now? It's going to keep them in this cycle. I could go on about this for like an hour, but I'm gonna stop now. But that is my quick overview of how I like to break this cycle. Yes, Kim.
Okay. So I know this isn't in the DSM-5, but I hear the term thrown around, so I wanted to let the two of you go at it. Tell us about orthorexia and what your thoughts are.
So orthorexia falls under that other specified feeding and eating disorders, or OSFED. Leslie, you want to take one?
Yeah, I think it's okay. So let me say this, that I'm hoping this will be helpful. When I think of eating disorders, I think of like a stone or a gem. And if you think about all of the little different facets on the gem, I look at the eating disorder as a whole, and then like each facet being anorexia, orthorexia, binge eating disorder, OSFED, right? So like it's all really kind of the same thing. It's just a different way of coping. So excuse me. So the symptoms are going to look a little bit different, but essentially it's all the same. Same thing with anorexia. It's getting to that place where they're so fearful that they will avoid foods that aren't considered safe or clean for them, as far as like, you know, going even to the point where it's like, I can't eat anything with preservatives in it. You know, even walking into a regular grocery store can be so overwhelming because there's nothing they can eat because there's preservatives and everything. So it's kind of taking that clean eating idea to the extreme. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
And Robin, you had a question?
Back to RFED, how does that differ, and can it be mistaken for picky eating, extremely picky eating?
Yes, absolutely. So RFID, and Leslie, you might have a better sense of this. I haven't had as many clients with it, but it would definitely fall more under like a sensory disorder. We see a lot of kids with autism tend to have RFID if you're gonna like pair something together. So I think of RFID as picky eating will usually come in food jags, and there's usually less rhyme and reason to it, whereas RFID tends to be a little more specific. Like Leslie was saying, it might be a texture thing, or the RFID could also be a fear of vomiting. Like maybe when they were a kid, they had a horrible bout of flu and they hated the feeling of throwing up so much that now they're afraid to eat because they're so afraid of throwing up. or it could be because of that fear, they will only do liquids and they won't do solid foods because they don't want the fear, they have a fear of choking. Or it could be a fear of crunchy foods or hot foods or something along that line. So it usually is more on that sensory spectrum. Picky eating, usually if the person gets hungry enough, they will eat, or it will be more of like a food jag where, you know, maybe they're picky for a while, or, you know, they simply don't like the food. Like, I would say if someone's a picky eater, let's say they won't eat broccoli, like a real simple one. Okay. This, you know, you have a kid, they refuse to eat broccoli and you're like, oh, that's a picky eater. Okay. Well, are they willing to eat other green vegetables? Then it's probably not ARFID. Are they willing to eat other things in that same texture category? It's probably not ARFID. Leslie, you want to add anything to that?
I think that was well put. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Dana has her hand. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. That wonderful graphic that you gave us, my question is right before you binge, like I'm thinking of a teen who she could connect when she would self-harm. Dad yells at her about her homework, and instead of saying, yeah, I probably need to do something different about my homework, she walks up the stairs and says, I'm a piece of shit, and then cuts. So maybe a couple of examples. What happens right before the coping, before the binging?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So it's often there's that tension that's already building, right? And it's, as you know, it's not about the dad saying, you know, what about your homework or whatever. It's been this buildup that, you know, they get to kind of their threshold, I feel like. And it just kind of, so that one comment probably tipped her over the edge and looking for that release. So whether that's cutting or binging, purging is often, there's often a really kind of euphoric relief in that as well. Yeah. So kind of releasing that tension.
Did that answer your question?
Kind of. It makes me want to know more, like the tension building. But carry on. You're doing a fabulous job.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
there's so many reasons, but usually it's not one event that will lead to it.
Right.
It's, yeah, as Leslie was saying, it's more, there's that kind of long-term feeling of lack of self-worth or whatever the emotion is there. And yes, there can be triggers and tipping points, but a lot of people that I see who are dealing with an eating disorder are going to binge. It's not that that specific day necessarily held a trigger. It's if they get into the cycle, it almost becomes a habit. So especially if they are restricting and it's leading to that binge, it doesn't have to have like a horrible moment that day. It's the fact that they've been doing this long enough that their body doesn't really know any other way. If they haven't eaten enough all day, I mean, so here's something I think basically everyone can relate to on a non-binge level. Like, and again, there's no judgment here because I've done this too. So raise your hand if you've ever at the end of a long day sat down and ate more than you planned on, or like ate the box of cookies. Right? Okay, so we've all done that. And that's not binge eating, first of all. Like, that's just, you know, it's a way of dealing with stress, but binge eating is on like an even bigger level. So if you haven't eaten enough, if you are super stressed, if this is something that your body has gotten into the habit of being hungry at that time, it's more likely it's going to keep occurring. So yes, there can be a specific trigger that exacerbates it, or on a day that maybe they weren't going to binge because they had been doing better, they end up binging anyway. There's a lot of different reasons, but there might not be anything that day or even that week that went bad.
Yeah. It could be it's raining, sun is shining.
Yeah. Kim?
I've wanted to just add something because I know that like we're talking about if someone's, you know, not feeling self-worth and all that, that's the underlying mechanism. But I've heard clients say like I love my binge eating episodes, and they kind of like fantasize about it in their head and start planning it. And it's something they really like that euphoric feeling. So I think it could be probably both and a whole wide range of emotions. I don't know if you've seen that in clients.
Yes. And I think that really speaks to what we were saying earlier about that process addiction, right? There's that whole process of fantasizing about it and planning it, like you said. And yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, there's that little rush of how am I going to hide it, or, how am I going to get the food? And, binge eating disorder is characterized with that shame or guilt on the other end of it. But during the process, whether it's the prep or the actual eating or purging or whatever, there is that rush, there is that chemical release, there is that a lot of times a feeling of numbness, that they're getting a check out from something that's going on in their life, whether it's their emotions or not wanting to have a difficult conversation with someone, or just wanting to, for a lot of my college students especially, like it's a wanting to avoid adulting. Like at the end of the day, they go home, they turn on Netflix, they grab the bag of chips, and they just zone out. And they don't have to be responsible. They don't have to do anything. And it's a break. I had one client who, she had severe binge eating disorder. She was the one who was eating 8,000 to 10,000 calorie binges, and she would push herself so extreme with her perfectionistic tendency. She was just doing. And then she would have this huge binge, and knowing that she was going to be so stomach pained, bloated, constipated that she wouldn't be able to get out of bed for about 3 days. And that was how she took a break. It was awful. It was painful, but that was how she allowed herself to not have to do everything. So that was that process addiction.
So I think it's important to know that symptoms can change. So if someone is, say they're binge eating, that, they can move into bulimia, or if somebody is, experiencing anorexia, they can switch to binge eating. Or so just know if someone's like, oh, they seem to be doing better, right? Or I've seen this too with people that I've seen a fair amount of people too that have been sober, and once they got sober, then the eating disorder kind of flared up. So just something to be aware of, that can kind of shift around if someone seems to be doing better. There's also sometimes this need to qualify for care. So feeling like they're not sick enough, not thin enough, not, whatever enough. And so kind of like not worthy of treatment, or just completely in denial that there's even an issue. So
yeah, so I actually have 3 short case studies here I want to share with you guys about clients that I actually saw. And I'm going to give you kind of the punchline ahead here. So the thing that all of these clients that I'm going to tell you about had in common is that they didn't think they had anything wrong with them, that they were not that sick. All right, so client number 1. So recently I saw an athlete dealing with bulimia who had such low levels of iron in her blood that she needed an immediate blood transfusion in the emergency room. So thankfully I was working with an amazing doctor who caught that, possibly saving her life. But she knew she had bulimia, but she's like, I'm good. Client number 2, another client peeing reddish urine with a puffy body that was hot to the touch. We believe that she was doing damage to her kidneys from restricting her food intake for so long, getting into rhabdomyolysis. Again, she understood her body was puffy. She thought she was getting fat. Client number 3. Client was having severe gastrointestinal issues that were most likely due to years of laxative abuse and restricting. It was misdiagnosed as gastroparesis until she finally saw a specialist. So again, she didn't think her eating disorder was that bad. So this is just a little example that most times they're not going to have a lot of medical complications until it's really late in the game, but that doesn't mean that they're still going to see themselves as that sick. Something that particularly happens in the brain with restriction is thinking becomes more and more rigid. So they can think they're the exception to the rule. They can say, you could have the best scientific evidence and they're going to be like, yeah, but that doesn't apply to me. So it's something that we need to be really aware of, that particularly the people who are restricting, but kind of in general, eating disorders can be very manipulative and very much in denial. So you need to be making sure that you're keeping track of all of the evidence and really monitoring carefully.
Yeah, I think, we're kind of taught that, it's only a problem really if the client feels it's a problem. And this is where I think we have to kind of shift gears a little bit. And, sometimes it is a problem and they're not there yet. So let's move on to, I'm just kind of checking our time here. So
Serena's raising her hand as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep, Serena, go ahead. Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question. It's for both of you, but maybe even more so for Leslie. My experience with eating disorders is I worked for the treatment center, CCTC, for 2.5 years. And since I've left there and now that I'm doing private practice, of course, I do not have lovely dietitians just around the corner in the other room to go to for help. So of course, with my clients, I'm always recommending them to see a dietitian, and there is a point where I'll say, I'm no longer going to see you unless you're going to get a higher level of care or have a dietitian. But something I'm starting to see is I feel pretty confident in recognizing a binge, but with some of my clients, they think they're binging, but they're not, particularly the college students, where they're saying, oh my God, I binge an entire bag of chips, or, usually it's carbs. And they're not really recognizing that it's not a binge. You actually just had a snack, and there was guilt and shame associated with it, but there is no evidence of it being a true binge. So I used to be able to say, talk to your dietitian about this, and we would talk about it in treatment teams. So I'm curious, as a therapist, how do you instill that in them? How do you get them to understand the binge side of it without going too far into the calories and everything like that?
Yeah, good question. So, so when I first recognize that someone does have an eating disorder, I make it very clear that part of their treatment is that they have to see a dietitian, and that they have to see their doc. As far as labs, I always check and see, when was their last set of labs? Were they within normal limits? I think, like you, working at a higher level of care in the past, I kind of still have that thought process. So I kind of, of course, my intake looks even different. So, yeah, so that's right off the get-go for me. And that's kind of, that's criteria for seeing me as a therapist, because I think that's one of the important things, is that with these types of disorders, I don't think it's wise for us to do it alone, right? It's so complicated, and there's so many different variables that, I'm like, that's just kind of how it is. It's a package deal. So, so I would say I don't really lack that support, I guess, in that way with the RD piece, and also their physician and or psychiatrist. So,
may I add on to that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so first of all, I'll say I always make sure my clients are seeing a therapist and a physician as well. But for the clients that are really resistant, so if they are appropriate for outpatient level care, so let's assume they don't need to go to a higher level of care, which we're going to talk about what that means in a little bit. I would say, give them a couple weeks to work up to that. If it's like, especially if therapy is so new, like if you're the first person they've seen and told this to, like that's a huge hurdle right there. So you might need to build that rapport and build the case for seeing a dietitian, and that can take a couple sessions. So don't expect that you're going to see them the first session. You're going to give them the laundry list of, okay, I need you to see a doctor and get your labs done. I need you to see a dietitian. I need you to be doing blah, 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 blah. Like you give them that, and I mean, you all know that's going to be overwhelming. So make sure that you're really supporting them as that person and really explaining that, you know, if they truly want to work through this, and right away they might not. So you got to build up the, why do you really want to get better? But if they truly want to work through it, they are going to need this additional support so that they can learn how to take care of their body and how to break out of these disordered eating cycles. And that's where the dietitian comes in super handy. So yeah, building that relationship, I think, is the most important piece in making that happen.
So this piece, Serena, is where I will kind of cross over a little bit into the dietitian piece, and I will do psychoed. So I will do psychoed around the binge restrict cycle, just coming from that biological standpoint, and just to, you know, or maybe it's going to be like a couple weeks before they get into Libby or something. So I will do some nutrition education there as far as kind of helping them to understand what's happening and kind of support them that way until they can get into Libby. Is that
Thank
helpful?
you. Yeah, that was my question, because I, you know, again, I do recommend everyone to see a dietitian and physician. I like having that treatment team aspect, but I have had a few clients that they can't get in right away, or they're checking their insurance, and I want to kind of offer that psychoeducation piece. But I had the hesitation, as that wasn't usually my role before. I know a little bit about it, but
yeah.
Okay.
And
Thank
I think that also speaks to staying within our scope, right? It's like that it can be a little trickier with this. And I feel like, you know, because of my experience in working at higher levels of care, I also hold a nursing license. So even though I'm not working in that capacity, I still have that knowledge. And I feel like, you know, of course I give the disclaimer, like, I'm not a medical provider. I'm not, you know, all of that. But I crossed over a little bit there, to be honest. So yeah.
So I'm going to just, we're going to talk about this a little bit more too, assuming we get to it. We're running out of time. So the only thing I would say in terms of crossing line, because I totally agree that it's appropriate to talk about some of the nutrition aspects if they're not seeing a dietitian yet, but I would really discourage you all from giving very specific information, especially around how many calories you should be eating, what you should be eating. That is outside of your scope. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So yes, you can say you should be eating more than you're currently eating, and you know, you don't need to be afraid of this, or you know, those kinds of things. But please, especially if you're going to send them to a dietitian, please don't say, oh, you should be eating X number of calories, because then they're going to come into me and be like, well, my therapist said that I need to do this, and I'd be like, ew. So okay, Dana.
You spoke so much about the importance of the team approach. If you're working with a team, how do you get parents to be appropriately on the team?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Because they're going to go home and, you know, get all these messages about, you're eating that again, or, you know.
Yeah.
That is.
I want to just start this conversation. So we only have an hour left. And the eating disorders, you're not going to learn all of this in 2 hours. So I'm going to send you a lot of resources, because neither Leslie or I do a ton of family-based therapy. Most of our clients are adults. So just to throw that out there. So we're going to just really briefly run through a list of different therapy methods next, but one of those is family-based therapy, or the Maudsley method. So if you want to look up more information on that, Maudsley, MAUDSLEY.
Yeah.
And that really talks about including the family and the parents at home in supporting the eating disorder recovery.
Yeah, that's going to be, that's definitely, one of the modalities. So when you have a minor, depending on the situation, of course, typically you're going to bring in the family and do some family therapy. I do, even with spouses and such, I will bring them in and do an education session with them, if appropriate. So if appropriate, I think that's important to include the family, especially as a minor. Yeah, so Maudsley family-based therapy is one of the methods and approach. We'll just roll right into that. So
let's just zip through these.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. So just some of the methods, you guys know these. So I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on this because we have a lot of material to get through. So CBT, we use motivational interviewing. I like to use art therapy, experiential, DBT, RODBT, and that's a whole radically open DBT. That's typically used with those that are in that over-controlled space, typically those diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. We talked about Maudsley a little bit. And exposure response therapy, food exposure. This is one of my favorite ones to do. Libby and I both do this. I think it's within both of our scopes to do this piece. I'll have meals, snacks, sometimes a meal outing. It's that kind of exposing them to even just eating with somebody else. Sometimes that's like a huge thing. Somebody seeing them as they're eating, and moving, moving through the scale. You start with safe foods and then moving up to those things that are a little bit scarier until they get to the point where it's like, I think I can do this, of course. And then there's the treatment team approach. Do you want to say anything about that, Libby?
Yeah, so I really just want to focus on who would be some of the different professionals on the treatment team. This is going to be one of your questions for your continuing ed too, so write these down. So besides someone doing psychotherapy, so MFT, psychologist, whatever your other credentials are, someone doing therapy, a dietitian, and a medical provider would be at minimum the people I would say need to be on the team. So a medical provider could be a MD, a PA, NP, depending on if they already have a doctor that they're established with, or if they need to find someone new and get in, whoever they feel comfortable with. And then beyond that, depending on severity and other needs, there might need to be a psychiatrist for more complex problems and medication management. If they're moving into a higher level of care, which we'll briefly touch on, there are often other team members such as diet techs or someone that would sit with them during meal times. On an outpatient level, perhaps a recovery coach, which is someone who doesn't necessarily have a degree in psychology or anything, but someone who is kind of helping to bridge that gap between treatment times, perhaps doing meals with them or helping them do outings and grocery shopping, or just kind of being there and supporting them in the day-to-day. That's a really new add-on. I haven't really had anyone that's worked with a coach yet. I just see them popping up online. It's not a necessity, but it's, if they don't have a really supportive family or partner, it can be an add-on. That's all I think of when I think of the treatment team. So I'd say that, the three essential ones: therapist, dietitian, and medical provider. And then, if they're having complications with either their heart or digestive tract or something, there might be a need for a psychologist or for a specialist like a gastroenterologist or something, just case by case. Okay, so we're going to jump into what is the dietitian's role in this. So just like with any of the professions, I think we don't come out of undergrad knowing a lot about eating disorders. So not just any dietitian is going to be great at working with eating disorders. They're going to have gone above and beyond in doing additional training and education and maybe mentoring or supervision with this. So just know that you want someone who has that training and experience to work with eating disorders if you're going to refer on. And please never send someone, well, really in general, but especially people with eating disorders, to someone who specializes in weight loss. If it says weight loss on their website, just say no. Okay, so does everyone know the difference between a registered dietitian and a nutritionist? Awesome. Okay, so this is one of my favorite things to educate on. So there is actually a big difference in dietitians and nutritionists. So all registered dietitians are nutritionists. Not all nutritionists are registered dietitians. And it comes down to credentialing. So the way I like to explain it to therapists as, you know, there's licensed marriage and family therapists and there are life coaches. So is that, yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding now. Okay, so you get it. So dietitians at a minimum have a bachelor's degree in nutrition science, a supervised internship, which is similar to like a medical residency or accruing your hours, which is when I did it, it was a minimum of 1,200 hours. I think that's up to now. National board exam, state licensure, continuing eds, ethics, all that stuff. And now they're also requiring a master's degree. So it is very regulated. It is, you know, it's the same as your licensure. So when I see a dietitian, it's on the same level of education as an MFT. So a nutritionist does not need to have any credentialing. You are all nutritionists. My dog is a nutritionist. You can call yourself a nutritionist. There is no legal stance around that term. So again, like my website, my business name is Not Your Average Nutritionist. I am a registered dietitian. I use that term because no one can spell dietitian and no one searches for it. But I make it very clear on my website what I am. So again, all dietitians are nutritionists, not all nutritionists dietitians. So if you take nothing else from this presentation, please know that. Okay, so here's a little fun fact I learned in an additional training that I went through that was done by someone who is both a dietitian and an LCSW. She did a course on counseling for dietitians and did a lot of research into the scope of practice for all the different medical professions. And she said she looked at, you know, all the different types of therapists and doctors and things. And she said that dietitians are uniquely given a scope based on training. So if we do additional training and counseling, for example, DBT, and feel that we're competent in using that, we can use it. Not saying that we are going to go into, you know, your childhood trauma or something, but like within our scope of talking about food and body image, we can use these different counseling techniques. So that's just something that's unique to our profession. What else did I want to say about dietitians? Okay, so just a couple other things that I think is useful to know about the dietitian. So as I said before, we are not allowed to make a diagnosis. So if you're working with a dietitian and you know, hopefully you're communicating with each other. We love talking to you guys, so please reach out, share, you know, the cases. But it's really helpful, especially for billing insurance, if we can get a diagnosis from you. So please help with that. We do a lot of nutrition education. So not only on the foods, but the physiology of the body. So where is the food going? What is it doing? How much do we need? How are the different, you know, things behaviorally that we're doing affect our food? psychology of eating. So why are you compelled to do X, Y, Z? That's all things that we do education on. There's something else I was going to say about that, and I lost it. My notes aren't making sense right here. Hang on. I don't know what I was going to say about that. But also just something else I think is really useful for you to know. So medications, specifically the SSRIs, are affected quite a bit by food intake, especially carbohydrates. So if someone is not eating enough and eating enough carbohydrate, their antidepressant is likely not going to work. Carbohydrates, food, are precursors of creating serotonin. So if they're not creating enough, the medication is going to be ineffective. And this was studied by Ansel Keys back with the Minnesota starvation experiment, which if you're interested in learning more about the effects of anorexia, especially psychologically, definitely research that. It's a really fascinating experiment from the 40s that they can never replicate. I'm going to do my last point and then I'll let you hop on, Leslie. So I also want to say something about meal plans, because I think a lot of people think when they go to a dietitian that they're going to be given a meal plan and told, eat this, don't eat that. And we're not the food police, number one. Also, at an outpatient level, it's very rarely that we're going to use meal plans, especially as you would see them in a higher level of care. So I don't use exchanges unless I'm working with someone who is coming from a higher level of care that has a meal plan. I will support them in maintaining that and transitioning them to more intuitive eating, which we'll talk about what that is in a bit. But I really focus at an outpatient level on helping people fit food into their life. So creating a specific meal plan for them is not serving them because life happens. They go to a friend's house, they go out to eat, they have to deal with whatever's left in their fridge. Right now, when they're not out grocery shopping as frequently, people are getting creative with their food. So if I told them you need to eat, half a cup of beans and 5 raspberries and whatever, like that's just not practical. So I have worksheets I'll do with my clients if they don't know how to put together a balanced meal. But at this level, I'm not putting specific meal plans together. And I remembered the thing that I was going to say. So the purpose of nutrition counseling is behavior change. So we're working on mindset, habits, behaviors, barriers to behavior change. So we're looking at, if your fear is having ice cream in the house because you think you're going to binge on it, we're working on helping them with the behaviors that are going to allow them to keep ice cream in the house and not binge on it. I don't know if that made any sense the way I just said it, but yes. Go, Leslie.
So that's, I think, one of the things that you said just reminded me that when I'm encouraging a client who maybe is a little more reluctant or in seeing a registered dietitian, is I let them know, like, she's not going to tell you what to eat because
not judging.
Nobody wants to be told what to eat, right? But especially this particular clientele. So on the flip side of that, I think that there is also can be a lot of safety, always is once they get there, in seeing the dietitian. She's somebody that is going to be able to keep track of weight, doing blind weights, so they don't know what they weigh. And because that's like one of the biggest fears is people coming in not wanting to gain weight. And so that's a real benefit. There's safety and security in that when she's doing that piece and kind of holding that for them. The other thing that I think, sometimes they really do want to talk about the food. And I think by seeing a registered dietitian, it gives them that space to talk about the food, right? Because they feel like that's what it's about, when we know it's really not about the food. But there's also, I think, a sense of comfort in that for them, and kind of exploring that with a dietitian. And then we work on what's really going on, right? The other piece that the dietitian does that is really helpful is looking at the labs. So, and talking with the physician, because labs are going to be super important with this population, especially those that are purging. But I think it's a big piece, and that's something, unless you're working on a higher level of care, that's something that really takes that piece off me, as far as like, okay, I know Libby's going to take care of that. Not that I won't talk to the physician as well, but that's something like that she can have on her plate, and kind of keep me in the loop that way. So that's really nice, not to, because with eating disorders, I mean, we already have notes and, treatment planning and different things like that. But with eating disorders, there's so much more, and it does take more time and more work. And so that's one of the things I just love about this piece of the treatment team, is because it's like, it's not all on us, right? We're kind of sharing the load here. So in figuring out what's best for our clients. I think
I
that's
will
it.
say with that too, I often make recommendations as to what labs I want to see, particularly in our county. I'm just going to say there's not a lot of there isn't really any medical providers that really get eating disorders.
A couple, but not many.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
none of my clients have seen those then. So it is helpful that I kind of have a list of labs I like to see, so that I know the physicians are looking at specific things, and then I'm able to see them as well. And then I will review any off labs or diagnoses with the clients. I'm quite shocked at the amount of times I've had clients come into me after having blood work done, and they didn't get any feedback from their physician, good or bad. They're just like, yeah, we took your labs, and they could have something off and they didn't tell them anything. So I'll review that with them, and if they have something else going on, we'll address that together.
I think that's really important, because instead of, I mentioned earlier, like asking the client, well, when was your last set of labs? So I encourage you not to say, hey, I think you should go get, see your doc, get some new labs, because they likely don't know which ones that they need to look at. I just had a talk with a physician 2 weeks ago, and that's one of the things I asked him, like, how comfortable are you as far as looking at labs and saying, okay, these are potentially indicators of an eating disorder. And he's like, yeah, I have no idea. So, which is another thing, we're trying to educate providers in the community, just so they're getting more comfortable and have a little bit of an idea of what to look for. So that's an important piece too. That's where I think it's important for Libby to make contact with that provider, instead of having the client go back and having to do more labs, right? Let's just get it all done in one poke here. So, okay. So anything else with that, Miss Libby?
Did you want to talk about the gateway piece?
The gateway piece. Yeah, so I think that sometimes, I kind of touched on that as far as clients wanting to talk about the food piece. I think sometimes the dietitian really can be the gateway into them being open to dealing with their eating disorder, because there is something almost, I think, exciting about talking about the food, because that's what their brain is so focused on, that's what they're thinking about majority of the time anyways. So sometimes it's helpful when they see the RD, it will kind of even open them up to treatment and to moving into recovery. Cool. Should we move to levels of care quickly?
Yeah, just
okay.
work through that.
So levels of care, I think this is important because there's so many. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but there's outpatient level of care as far as, like I'm assuming most of us do. They come to your office once a week, twice a month, whatever. And you're still having the treatment team approach as far as dietitian, a physician, possibly psychiatrist. IOP of level of care is the next higher level of care. That's when they're spending, you know, a minimum of 3 days a week, 3 to 5 days a week, kind of at a day treatment program. But it's about minimum of 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours in each block for 3 to 5 days per week. So they come home, stay the night, go back to do the same thing. Then there's PHP level of care, which is partial hospitalization. And that's where they spend all day. So you're looking at, you know, probably 5 to 7 days where they're in day treatment all day, but they still go home, stay the night. It's kind of like their job, basically. The next level of care is residential. This is when they go to a treatment center that is, they're going to be staying the night. And basically they'll stay, as bottom line is, as long as insurance will allow it. And so they're getting round the clock treatment. And then hospitalization would be the highest level of care. So these are people that typically there's not a lot of treatment happening at that point. They're just being stabilized as far as medically. And so once they get, you know, the idea is once they're medically stable, that they start kind of titrating down levels of care. And it's important for them to do those steps, because if they don't, we often see relapse when they kind of skip a level. So just so you have awareness around that, those levels of care exist. Totally not your job to figure that piece out. Often treatment centers will do free assessments. And so as long as the client's willing, and then they'll be able to determine what level of care somebody might need. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that. And then shall we move on to when to refer to a higher level of care? This is probably what you guys are wanting. So again, well, I just said this. Oh, look at me, I'm already ahead. Know your scope and ability. Treatment centers doing the assessments. If you need help, I want to say this, I think it's important in figuring out, like, well, I don't know, what treatment center am I, I don't even know what treatment centers are out there. I am happy to help with that. That's one of my favorite things to do, is helping people connect and kind of being that liaison as far as what options are out there as far as different programs and even distance-wise, even throughout the country. So, so just know that, like, you don't have to figure that out. And I'm happy to help connect you with some options. Of course, there's the readiness for change and the client being ready for that option, and also that denial piece that can come into place. So client has to be ready, but it's like Serena was saying earlier too, sometimes you do get to that point where it's like, okay, we're at a crossroads. Like, this is really out of my, this is out of my scope now. You need more care than I can give you at this level.
Yeah, I think Leslie and I have both dropped clients for this reason of, you really need to be in higher level of care. I ethically can't keep seeing you. So I will support you in helping you find a higher level of care, but we can't keep working together. And you just have to be very firm and set boundaries with these clients.
That's a really hard place to be as a clinician, because it often starts to feel like abandonment. And so it's a hard place. It's tricky. So again, I think if you're get to that point where you're looking to make that call, like, just reach out for some support and consultation. Yeah. Libby, you want to talk about that next piece?
So I want to point out too that with an eating disorder, oftentimes their labs and medical assessment will actually look quite perfect, even when they've been in their behaviors for a long time. So strictly going off of blood work or heart rate or something is not going to be the end all be all for a diagnosis. I think that's just really important. I mean, there can be horrible organs can be shutting down, and the body is so resilient at trying to maintain homeostasis in the blood that the lab work is not going to show that. So the heart can be deteriorating, the gut can be malfunctioning and not absorbing nutrients as well, and having, you know, gastric delays. You know, things can be truly shutting down in the body, and it's very, very hard to assess that. So it's important that these individuals are getting treatment even if they look medically sound. So I just want to say that, that being said, for going to a higher level of care, they will ask for specific medical assessments. That's, again, not your job, but just to know that. It's important when referring to a higher level of care that you are able to report the frequency of the behavior. So how often are they purging? How often are they binging? If you have an idea of, you know, how many calories they're eating a day or something, not necessarily things that you, and the client probably knows these things, but just being able to state that for the purpose of getting into treatment can be helpful too, if it's not just coming from the client.
And again, just bringing in a team and other providers. Call us if you need help with that piece. Yeah, just not doing it on your own. So let's move into the intuitive eating piece. We're just going to kind of read through these. So intuitive eating, I'll start and then I'll hand it over to you. So intuitive eating is our philosophy that we take on in our lives and in the lives of our clients. So intuitive eating is the philosophy. I don't know any treatment team, any treatment facility that doesn't use this philosophy. So we're hitting on this heavy because I think it's sometimes it's a lot for people to absorb, and because we all have our own stuff. And so this is a philosophy we're coming from, gives you guys some insight as to what's happening as far as our approach with food.
Yeah. So an intuitive eater is defined as a person who makes food choices without experiencing guilt or the ethical dilemma, honors hunger, respects fullness, and enjoys the pleasure of eating. So the authors of intuitive eating, there's a book, have 10 principles of intuitive eating. So we're just going to read through these. This is all coming straight from their website, but we're going to just whip through them.
Yeah. So the first principle is rejecting the diet mentality. Throw out the diet books and magazine articles that offer you the false hope of losing weight quickly, easily, and permanently. Get angry at diet culture that promotes weight loss and the lies that have led you to feel as if you were a failure every time a new diet stopped working and you gained back all of the weight. If you allow even one small hope to linger that a new and better diet or food plan might be lurking around the corner, it will prevent you from being free to discover intuitive eating.
Number 2, honor your hunger. Keep your body biologically fed with adequate energy and carbohydrates. Otherwise, you can trigger a primal drive to overeat. Once you reach the moment of excessive hunger, all intentions of moderate conscious eating are fleeting and irrelevant. Learning to honor this first biological signal sets the stage for rebuilding trust in yourself and in food.
The third one is making peace with food. Call a truce. Stop the fight. Give yourself unconditional permission to eat. If you tell yourself that you can't or shouldn't have a particular food, it can lead to intense feelings of deprivation that build into uncontrollable cravings and often binging. When you finally give in to your forbidden foods, eating will be experienced with such intensity, it usually results in that Last Supper, overeating, and overwhelming guilt.
So with that last one, I flashed, it's looking backwards in my screen, but I actually wrote a book called Permission to Eat as a recovery book for clients struggling with eating disorders. So I'll send a link to that as well if you're interested. Challenge the food police is number 4. So scream aloud no to thoughts in your head that declare you're good for eating minimal calories or bad because you ate a piece of chocolate cake. The food police monitor the unreasonable rules that diet culture has created. The police station is housed deep in your psyche, and its loudspeaker shouts negative barbs, hopeless phrases, and guilt-provoking indictments. Chasing the food police away is a critical step in returning to intuitive eating.
All right. Everyone hanging in there, okay, as we, all right. Number 5 is discover the satisfaction factor. The Japanese have wisdom to keep pleasure as one of their goals of healthy living. In our compulsion to comply with diet culture, we often overlook one of the most basic gifts of existence, the pleasure and satisfaction that can be found in the eating experience. When you eat what you really want in an environment that is inviting, the pleasure you derive will be a powerful force in helping you feel satisfied and content. By providing this experience for yourself, you will find that it takes just the right amount of food for you to decide you've had enough.
Number 6, feel your fullness. In order to honor your fullness, you need to trust that you will give yourself the foods that you desire. Listen for the body signals that tell you you are no longer hungry. Observe the signs that show that you're comfortably full. Pause in the middle of eating and ask yourself how food tastes and what your current hunger level is.
Number 7, cope with your emotions with kindness. First, recognize that food restriction, both physically and mentally, can, in and of itself, trigger loss of control, which can feel like emotional eating. Find ways to comfort, nurture, distract, and resolve your issues. Anxiety, loneliness, boredom, and anger are all emotions we all experience throughout life. Each has its own trigger, and each has its own appeasement. Food won't fix any of these feelings. It may comfort for the short term, distract from the pain, or even numb, but food won't solve the problem. If anything, eating for an emotional hunger may only make you feel worse in the long run. You'll ultimately have to deal with the source of the emotion.
Number 8, respect your body. Accept your genetic blueprint. Just as a person with a shoe size of 8 would not expect to realistically squeeze into a size 6, it is equally futile and uncomfortable to have a similar expectation about body size. But mostly, respect your body so you can feel better about who you are. It's hard to reject the diet mentality if you are unrealistic and overly critical of your body shape or size. All bodies deserve dignity.
Just want to say something about that really quickly. The shoe size piece. So we also believe in the set point theory. And when I speak with clients about that, I often liken it to their shoe size, right? Sure, they can amputate some toes, they can bind their feet, they can, go to extreme measures to change the size of their shoes, or the size of their feet. But if that's how the size that their feet are meant to be, how that parallels with the size of their body. So just wanted to speak to that. So number 9, Movement. Feel the difference. Forget militant exercise. Just get active and feel the difference. Shift your focus to how it feels to move your body rather than the calorie burning effect of exercise. If you focus on how you feel from working out, such as energized, it can make the difference between rolling out of bed for a brisk morning walk or hitting the snooze alarm. I want to speak to that real quickly as well. So exercise restriction. So those clients that are medically unstable or not getting the calories they need, oftentimes we will, treatment team again, talk about what restrictions need to put in place so that we can help them from getting sicker or landing in the hospital. So know that piece. We don't encourage movement for everyone initially. And those people that are ready for movement, I really encourage them to start by finding ways that are fun for them. I have a client that had been running marathons and she's like, I realize I hate running. I'm like, don't run. So really encouraging people to kind of even go back to their childhood and think of things that were fun for them. I have one that actually it was the same. It was the marathon lady. She's like, I actually like hopscotch. I was like, get after some hopscotch, girl. Let's do it. So just finding ways that are fun to move your body, hula hooping, whatever. You can be creative. When I went through recovery and doing this process many moons ago, I did a belly dancing class, like just to see, like, do I like this? Is this fun? And so that's kind of like a good place to start with them.
Yeah. And I'll say to that too, don't feel like you have to know what that exercise restriction needs to look like. Definitely, be identifying if it seems excessive or if they're, not safe. But the dietitian and the doctor will be particularly making those decisions, especially depending on their fitness background. So I was a personal trainer and I've been a dancer and athlete most of my life. So I feel very comfortable making exercise recommendations. Not all dietitians will, but that doesn't have to be your job per se. All right, and then our last one is number 10, honor your health with gentle nutrition. So make food choices that honor your health and taste buds while making you feel good. Remember, you don't have to eat perfectly to be healthy. You'll not suddenly get a nutrient deficiency or become unhealthy from one snack, one meal, or one day of eating. It's not what you eat consistently. It's what you eat consistently over time that matters. Progress, not perfection, is what counts. Wow, that just sounds like my personal mission statement. I haven't read this in a while. I cannot tell you how many times I say almost this verbatim to my clients without even having known this was what they wrote. One snack, one meal, one day of eating is not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. And I think that's something that, all of you can take to your clients of, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. I ate a cheeseburger or whatever it is. Like, great. How did it taste? It doesn't have, like, we shouldn't be putting food into these good and bad categories. Mm-hmm. So that's what I want to say about that.
Yeah, they do that all on their own. So yeah. Well, let's finish this piece and then we'll ask about questions. So freedom and intuitive eating, we don't always start clients with it. Oh, right. So sometimes the intuitive eating for clients feels too out of control, like there's not enough structure there. So just know that it's not appropriate to start everyone at that place, even though it's a fabulous read. That sometimes they need more structure and then we kind of move towards that. And so that's where the dietitian is really important in that too, to kind of see, what do they need? And clients are pretty, open to that, I think, mm-hmm. as far as like even saying like, oh, I feel like I need a little more support that's like too free flowing.
Yeah. I have several clients even right now who, I've even been in treatment for a while. I have one client I've been seeing for 4 months or so now, and she came from, I think she did residential and PHP and then came to me, and she's still, she loves the idea of intuitive eating. She wants to get there. She knows that's our end goal. And we are taking extreme baby steps towards that. We were working with her meal plan from residential and then tweaking that because she's an athlete and she was getting back into her sport. So we had to make changes to that, but she still needed that structure around when and how much to eat. But then we were getting more flexible with like, okay, so some days you're not going to be as hungry as others. So within your meal plan, you can fluctuate 2 exchanges. So you can add 2 or subtract 2 on any given day, but that's your cap, because we didn't want her to have full free flow with this yet, because her instinct was to restrict more. So she still needed those guidelines, that safety net of saying, you still need to be eating at least this much, but you have a little wiggle room. And that was her baby step. And so now we're getting to more of, okay, so now you get to have a little more freedom in, when your snack times are. Before it was like, okay, I want you eating, at these times. And now it's, okay, sometime between lunch and dinner, and you get to decide and see how your body feels with that. And so she's starting to open up, and eventually she's going to get to a place where she can go off of hunger and fullness and desire and make those decisions and be able to nourish herself. But right now she just needs that extra structure.
I think that's an important point to hit on quickly, is that hunger and fullness cues. I don't think we even have said this so far. I did mention being kind of cut off from our emotions earlier, their emotions. And because they're so cut off and so much in their head, more often than not, they have lost their hunger and fullness cues. So that's part of the process of recovery, is helping them get in tune with that. And that is a process. And so I start with, there's a lot of things, but just noticing any sensations that they might be feeling in their body, because there's been so much disconnect. So it's really unreasonable for us to ask them, like, well, just eat when you're hungry. Just, it's like, that's not the way it works for them, because most of them don't know. They don't know if they're hungry, and some don't know when they're full. So I think that was I wanted to say that.
I'm only going to say one more thing in this. So my big takeaway for everyone is all foods fit in a healthy diet. I don't subscribe to there being good and bad foods. I think all foods have nutrition within them. Yes, we need to look at some balance, but there's no food in and of itself that is bad. So that is something I really try to impart on my clients, that, if it's something that is a food and is FDA approved for the mass market, unless you have an allergy to it, or, within reason, religious restrictions or things like that, it's okay for you to eat it.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on to that our next piece, are there any questions, comments, thoughts feelings about the intuitive eating piece?
I'm not seeing any hands, so.
Okay, we'll move along then.
Yeah.
So another philosophy that we subscribe to is health at every size. Of course, there's a book on that. Libby, I think you're going to link that as well. So health at every size. Miss Libby?
Oh, sorry. I forgot. We have our color-coded notes. So BMI, or body mass index, really BMI stands for bullshit measuring index. Thank you. I'm glad people are laughing at that. So BMI, just quick history lesson on the BMI. Hopefully everyone knows, vaguely what that is, but it was created over 100 years ago. I don't even know when it was created, based on a bunch of young, healthy white men. who are all, probably on the slimmer side. And so that, based us around what is underweight, healthy weight, overweight, and then the 3 classifications of obesity. And we're finding that that doesn't really fit, because not only are we not all young, healthy white men, there's different races and cultures and genders and genetics. As we were talking about with that set point theory, when we were talking about the shoe size and everything, like some people's bodies are just not going to fit within that, and they are still going to be healthy. So when we're looking at health, I'll let Leslie get into this more, but health does not need to be based on a size. So while insurances are still requiring BMI for a lot of the eating disorder things, somewhat, I would really encourage you all personally to let go of the concept of BMI.
Yeah. So yeah, just to piggyback on that, yeah, people can be healthy. There's so many assumptions that people will make, and oh, well, they're not healthy, they're this or that, and it's like, well, they might be, right? You don't know their labs, you don't know what their conversations with their doctors have been. So I think just to be mindful of that unless we have some health markers that tell us differently, and of course their history, genetics, all of that, like Libby was saying, we don't know if someone's healthy or not. And health behaviors can be improved regardless of size. And I think the opposite holds true as well. Just because someone looks healthy doesn't mean they are. I've seen this over and over again with clients that participate in compulsive exercising, right? It's like, oh, they look so fit, so healthy. When one particular former client is coming to mind, and you would, just looking at her, she looked like the picture of health. Young, glowing skin, just, super toned body. And she was bleeding from her throat from throwing up so much, and she was actually needed to be hospitalized. And so I think I would say more often than not, our clients probably look like healthy when actually they're really not. So yeah, just not making assumptions. We can't tell who is, really struggling. So
yeah, just to finalize on that, we're not saying, and this is, so when I first learned about health at every size, I initially didn't buy into it. So if you're feeling skeptical about this, I understand, because I was there for at least a year, if not longer, after learning about this concept, because I was thinking, well, how can someone be healthy if they're 50 pounds or 500 pounds? It didn't make sense. And then it really clicked when someone explained it to me. It's not healthy at every size, it's health at every size. So you can work on your health. You can work on taking care of yourself, taking care of your body, making strides towards becoming healthier, regardless of what your current size is. It doesn't mean that you have to stay at this size. It doesn't mean that that's the correct size for you, but you can take care of your body no matter where you are. And so that's when it really clicked for me that health at every size was a philosophy that I wanted to really take on. So yeah, I'll link more resources about that when I email you guys.
So we'll move into our last section now, because I'm just, again, aware of the time, so that we want to leave some time for any questions or discussion at the end here. So Libby, do you want to talk about that, the next piece?
Yeah, I should have gone through this a little bit better. This was a quote taken directly from a website that's really long. I'm going to summarize this 1 second. Go to the next point while I think about this for a second.
Okay. So let's see. So this last piece we want to talk about are do's and don'ts in talking to clients. So one of the things, you know, as clinicians, we're taught about self-disclosure, what's appropriate, what's not, only using it when it's going to be therapeutically appropriate for that client in that specific situation. And I think the same goes with this particular topic. However, that said, we really encourage you, unless this is really within your scope and eating disorders are kind of your expertise, I wouldn't even go there with any kind of self-disclosure, because I've seen that backfire. I've seen it backfire with medical doctors, and I've seen it backfire just with therapists. Meaning well and wanting to connect and relate, and at the same time it winds up doing more damage than good. So just not talking about your own struggles with food and or body image, I would like to think that goes without saying, but unfortunately I think it's something just to note. Yeah. And did you want to say, Libby?
Go.
Oh, and then the other piece is, as therapists, of course, we referred to this before, that we don't give meal plans or calorie levels. We refer to the RD. But, you know, if the client is giving you any information about their food intake or behaviors, just to kind of note that, chart that, and just do some tracking around that. Also not weighing our clients, unless you're in a treatment center setting, just leave that to the RD. You know, one of the things that we work on with the clients is encouraging them to not weigh themselves, or sometimes I'll even go like the harm reduction route, as far as like if they're weighing themselves every, 3 times a day, like, well, what would that be like if you weigh 2 times a day, right? Because no matter what the scale says, it's going to mess with their head. The eating disorder is going to latch on to that, and it's going to take them down a spiral. So the ultimate goal is for them getting rid of their scales and not having a scale at all. But again, some clients, I mean, you can see the terror on their face when you encourage that. So when they're ready, that's the ultimate goal there. Mm-hmm. Don't believe everything the MD will tell you. This is huge. Unfortunately, like Libby said, there's not a lot of education for our providers. This isn't something that they really learn much about in med school. And so there's a few of us in the community that have been trying to reach out over the years, I think even more so in the last probably few months here, in really trying to connect and educate and just, again, enhance that team approach so that there's a better understanding there. And so just know that, like, a lot of people will defer to the doc for things, and we don't. We question. So it's really amazing when there is a doc that knows what they're doing to help the client. So,
and if that's not enough to tell you, so think about the fact that on average, you're seeing your client an hour every week, and the MD is seeing them for maybe 15 minutes at most, probably every 3 months or once a year. And they're supposed to be assessing all this stuff, and they don't have time to give education or dig into the deep stuff that you've had the privilege of getting to understand. So, take the medical stats, but, look at everything with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You want to do the next one?
So the first one I realized we already covered, so I'm not going to worry about that.
Oh, excellent.
And kind of this next one as well, but I want to just reiterate the idea of a lot of people, a lot of our clients will categorize food as healthy versus unhealthy, or good versus bad. And that is a disordered eating mindset, you know, a lot based in diet culture. So like right now, I mean, we see this with all the different diet trends over time, but, you know, with the rise of keto and the villainization of carbohydrates and stuff, like people will come in and say, oh, I was so bad, I ate bread. No, you are not a bad person. Food does not have a moral value. What's really going on here? And digging into that piece of it. Because again, there is no good and bad food, but they're putting some value in how they eat. Something about their self-worth is tied to their eating. So digging into that, like exploring what's really going on in there, because there's not science to back that that's the true thing. Did you want to say more? Or do you want me to hop to the end?
I think we're good hopping to the end.
Okay. These are just some really quick points, and then we'll open up for questions. So again, please do not promote any diets or exercise regimes. Everyone's food needs are very individualized. Fad diets are a bad idea. So I'm just saying, please just don't tell people to do that. Something to do in a session though, especially in your intake or as it comes up, is ask about family history with eating disorders or the family environment with food and how that's affecting their food choices. I see a lot of clients, I mean, I had a 60-something-year-old man that I was seeing for a while, and we realized that the root of a lot of his food issues went back to his childhood and how his parents acted around food. And that's stuff that is really, I think, important because you can't change their childhood, but I mean, you all know as therapists that that's stuff that you need to help them process and realize that that doesn't have to be their reality anymore.
Yeah, and I second that. Just kind of, you know, even if you're like, I don't know what to do with this, I kind of suspect an eating disorder. I think it's just gathering that information, just kind of in your assessments, and being able to, you know, pass that on to the treatment team. So, yeah. Anything else, Libby, before we open it up to questions?
No, we actually made it through.
Okay, we made it through. So yeah, so that's the end for us. So just, do you guys have any questions or comments or anything that stood out to you?
Yes, Christina.
Well, thank you very much. It was very informative. So I know one of the hardest pieces with treating individuals with eating disorders is getting insurance approval and getting someone into treatment and then getting them discharged too early because their insurance runs out. Are you guys seeing that insurance is being more accepting of treatment lately, or is it still kind of the same?
I think it's something that continues to get better. There's obviously a long way to go. But I think even in the last year, it's been getting a lot more covered. I don't work a lot with insurance, so I can't speak to that too specifically. I do know, so I take SunCal, so also I take referrals, I need clients. But SunCal will cover dietitian twice a month for any condition. So that's a really great one, no copay to the client. They just need their physician referral. So it kind of depends on the insurance company, and I can't speak to the higher levels of care. I know they're looking for specific indicators. But as far as, you know, getting insurance coverage for your outpatient client, or when you're sending them on, or if you're writing a super bill and sending that in, definitely get documentation from the whole treatment team that they need to be seeing you. And I always ask this of the doctors, therapists, psychiatrists that I share clients with, like, can you please write a letter to me or to the insurance company, or send it to me, but you wrote it to the insurance company, so that I have documentation that they need to be seeing a dietitian. And that goes a long way towards saying, like, I'm not the only person saying this client is struggling. There are several of us that can attest to the fact that they really need help, and that I find really does help with reimbursement.
I do not take insurance, so I don't have that struggle. And I honestly don't know, since being out of the loop of working in higher level of care. I don't know I don't have my finger on the pulse of what that looks like at this moment. So I wish I had more information, but yeah.
I know right now, with everyone having to go to telehealth, a lot of insurance companies have been changing their policy, even if it's just for short term, to allow telehealth to be processed. So if you are taking insurance, I would definitely reach out or check with your insurance companies to see what their policies are right now. Other questions? Did we overwhelm you? No? Okay, good. Kim.
You mentioned the sugar addiction. Like, I was working with a client who she was trying to give me every piece of evidence that she was addicted to sugar and that she needed to eliminate it all. So for people that are like, you know, there's the Overeaters Anonymous model where they totally kick out sugar. Like, I don't know, what's the balance there if someone's so convinced they're addicted to it?
I don't like the Overeaters Anonymous model. I like that there's the support group aspect of it. There are other support groups. There are eating disorder anonymous groups. There's, you know, other things. Personally, I don't believe that we are powerless to food or whatever it is they say. But with clients who are super resistant like that, I would treat them in the way that you would treat their resistance to anything. And, you know, so assuming the client's an adult, like, I will tell them, like, so this is the science, this is what I know, this is what I have seen work for people, but you're an adult and you get to make that decision. If you want to try not eating sugar, great, but I don't think it's going to work for you. I might not say it exactly like that, but I will keep giving them the information and supporting them and asking them how that's going. And a lot of times they might try it for a while and then realize that, you know, they can stay free of it for so long, but the cravings are still there. The thing that I found really works with people who feel like they're addicted to or they're afraid of binging on specific foods is really an exposure therapy model. So I'll use the example of someone who, well, let's just say that they're afraid of all things sugary. We'll just go with that example. So this is what I would do with a client that's dealing with that. So I would say pick one food in that category that you've really been missing, like something that you know you enjoy eating, even if you're really scared of it right now. One very specific food. I want it to be down to the brand and the flavor and all of that. So let's say they choose ice cream. So they're going to get Breyer's vanilla ice cream, and I want them to keep it stocked in their freezer at all times. If they eat all of it, I want them to go out and buy the exact same thing and make sure it is always in their house. And inevitably, the first day, the first week or so, they're going to binge on it. They're going to, you know, go through the whole carton or most of the carton the first day. They're going to freak out. They're going to say, this doesn't work. See, this is why I'm addicted, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to keep saying, like, you need to stick through. I will tell my clients flat out, you must follow through on this, because if you buy it once, freak out, and then never buy it again, you are cementing in your mind that this is a bad thing. But if they continue to buy it and keep it in the house, eventually it's just another food, and they're going to eat less and less of it. And there's going to be days where they don't have any, and days where they have a reasonable portion. And it's going to really just normalize that it's there, and they'll find that they can keep that in the house. And then I'll say, do that with another food that you were scared of. And usually after about 2 foods, they've now gotten to a place of essentially intuitive eating with everything, because they've normalized that food so much.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I am aware of our time and people needing to hop off. I'll let you two say any last things, and then please remember Libby asked you on the chat to just type your name out. That's going to be our roster. I know a few people signed off and we still have record of you, but did you two want to say anything else before we all sign off?
Thank you all so much for joining in. This was really fun to talk about with all of you. And I know Leslie and I talked about this before, but if you are, having questions about a client or just need a case consult or something, we're happy to chat with you as well. We've been working with eating disorders for quite a while, and we both specialize in it. So we're here for you. We want to help our community. And if there's any specific information, particularly around anything today that we talked about, because I mean, there's so much eating disorder stuff out there, let me know, and I'm happy to find some good articles or education or books or something to send your way.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Leslie,
And
talk.
yeah, I just want to say I appreciate everyone logging in. It was nice to be in community today. And yeah, feel free to reach out and stay connected if anything comes up or you just want to chat about something further. So thanks.
Thank you.
All right, look forward to CEU emails coming through and lots of great resources from Libby and Leslie soon to come.
All right, thanks everybody.
All right, bye-bye.